In less than 48 hours, everything changed. It did not happen with a screaming match in the corridors of Buckingham Palace or a sensational leaked tabloid scandal. It happened with a single piece of heavy stock paper left quietly on a mahogany desk. What Camilla realized behind closed doors, staring at a seemingly routine administrative update from the Duchy of Cornwall, was that she had been entirely cut off. A signature authority had been quietly revoked, a discretionary funding line permanently erased. This is the story of a secret financial power, grab a coldly forensic discovery by a resolute Prince of Wales, and the devastating realization that the Queen of the United Kingdom actually owns absolutely nothing. This video will unpack the carefully constructed illusion of Camilla's absolute power and the staggering commercial desperation hiding just beneath the surface of her royal triumph. We will look at how she attempted to secure a permanent, untouchable financial pipeline for her non-royal family, how Prince William uncovered the paper trail and the silent, ruthless institutional retaliation that followed. What looked like standard financial compliance was actually the complete dismantling of a shadow empire. That detail matters because this was never just about money, it was about who truly controls the future of the monarchy. To understand the sheer magnitude of this institutional takedown, you have to look at the illusion of power Camilla had built over 3 decades. For 30 years, she played the longest, most heavily criticized game of psychological public relations in modern history. And for a brief moment, following the coronation, it appeared she had won it all. She had the crown placed on her head. She stood center stage on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. She watched as her own grandchildren, not just the royal heirs, held her robes. In her mind, she had completely rewritten history, successfully erasing the towering, unmanageable legacy of Diana, Princess of Wales. She believed she had King Charles completely managed, navigating his tempers and isolating him from those who might challenge her influence. She felt utterly untouchable. During this peak of assumed absolute authority, a quiet but aggressive shift occurred behind palace walls. Camilla began operating under the assumption that the vast wealth of the crown was an extension of her own personal victory. But there is a massive psychological difference between wearing a crown and actually owning the estate that funds it. The Spencer family, Diana's bloodline, possesses centuries of independent aristocratic wealth, vast tracts of land and immense private fortunes that do not rely on the throne. Camilla does not have that luxury. Despite her title, her private assets are surprisingly modest by aristocratic standards. This created a staggering commercial desperation. She knew that her proximity to the king was her only real currency, and she knew that Charles would not live forever. Before this, the strategy was simple. While Charles was the Prince of Wales, he controlled the Duchy of Cornwall, a $1 billion private real estate portfolio that funds the heir to the throne. For years, Camilla enjoyed the unhindered benefits of this staggering wealth. But as queen, her focus shifted to her vulnerabilities. She needed to secure hard, unshakable assets for her own children, Tom and Laura, before the inevitable transition of power. What appears to be true, based on the subtle administrative shifts and sudden staff restructuring during the early days of the new reign, is that a complex network of discretionary stipends, deeply discounted long-term property leases on duchy land, and quiet consulting retainers were being structured to benefit Camilla's private circle. She attempted to weave her non-royal children into the very fabric of the royal payroll. Assuming that the king's absolute protection would shield these arrangements from scrutiny, she thought she was building an impenetrable financial fortress. She believed the system would blindly obey the king and by extension obey her. Then Queen Elizabeth passed away, and the tectonic plates of royal power shifted instantly. Charles became king, but more importantly, Prince William became the Prince of Wales. In a matter of seconds, the legal ownership of the Duchy of Cornwall and its $1 billion portfolio transferred directly to William. Charles no longer had any legal authority over the estate, and Camilla, blinded by the pageantry of her new title, severely underestimated the quiet, analytical ruthlessness of her stepson. William did not rush into the duchy offices making demands. He did not act out of reckless anger or immediate spite. He moved with the precision of a corporate executive performing a hostile takeover. Weeks later, William brought in his own people. He initiated a comprehensive, granular financial audit of the entire Duchy of Cornwall portfolio. It was framed publicly as a routine transition of management, a responsible review of assets by the new Duke, but internally it was a forensic hunt. William and his fiercely loyal advisors went through every ledger, every long-term lease agreement, and every discretionary spending account. They were looking for the anomalies. They were looking for the shadow payroll. And they found it. The paper trail exposed the deeply discounted properties intended for Camilla's family. It revealed the quiet stipends disguised as operational costs. It laid bare the entire mechanism of commercial exploitation that Camilla had tried to cement in the final days of Charles's tenure as Duke. This is where the story changes. A lesser royal someone driven by ego and emotion might have marched into Clarence's house and demanded an explanation. They might have leaked the audit to the press to publicly shame the Queen Consort, but William possesses a deeply ingrained understanding of institutional warfare, heavily influenced by watching his mother suffer at the hands of the palace machine. He chose a path far more devastating. He chose administrative execution. The retaliation was completely silent. It was carried out not through shouting matches, but through certified mail and polite emails from the duchy's legal department. William weaponized the very protocol Camilla thought would protect her. The duchy's accountants simply sent notifications to the relevant parties that, following a standard review of commercial viability, certain long-term leases would not be renewed under their previous terms. They informed discretionary vendors that their services were no longer required for the new fiscal year. The backdoor access was permanently sealed. When the letter arrived on Camilla's desk, the realization must have been suffocating. The documents were wrapped in the impenetrable language of corporate compliance. There was no personal attack to defend against. There was no accusation to deny. William had merely enforced standard business law, and in doing so, he had completely dismantled her secret financial pipeline. She was trapped. She could not complain publicly without exposing her own staggering exploitation of royal funds. She could not claim she was being bullied, because the actions taken by William were legally flawless and entirely justified under the strict mandate of the duchy. The illusion of her absolute power shattered against the cold, hard reality of property law. She realized, perhaps for the first time in 30 years, that while she may share the king's bed and wear the king's jewels, Prince William holds the actual deeds to the land. In a state of sudden, deep panic, cornered by a bureaucratic maneuver, she could not outsmart. She had only one card left to play. She had to take the financial notices to King Charles. She had to demand that he intervene, that he pull rank on his own son and force William to restore the shadow payroll. She walked into the king's private study, expecting the man she had controlled for decades to fiercely defend her honor and her family's future. When Camilla placed the heavily redacted duchy audit reports onto King Charles's desk, she fully expected the man who had torn apart his first marriage and defied a global institution for her to once again fly into a protective rage. For 30 years, Charles's guilt over her public vilification had been her greatest weapon. Whenever she felt slighted, Charles would demand apologies, force protocol changes, and insist on her elevation. She expected him to immediately summon Prince William and demand the reinstatement of every cancelled lease and revoked stipend, but that is not what happened. As the king reviewed the polite, legally bulletproof notices of eviction and contract termination issued by his son's office, he did not reach for the telephone. He did not summon the Prince of Wales. He looked at the paperwork. He looked at his wife, and he offered a devastating, hollow silence. This was the psychological climax of her decades-long campaign. Charles, the man she had molded and managed, refused to save her. And the reason why reveals the brutal reality of their new dynamic. Charles is no longer the rebel prince fighting for his mistress. He is an aging monarch burdened by a fragile institution, heavily dependent on the surging global popularity of William and Catherine to keep the crown relevant. More importantly, Charles understands the law. He knows that William's absolute legal control over the Duchy of Cornwall means the king cannot intervene without, triggering a catastrophic constitutional crisis and forcing a public disclosure of Camilla's shadow payroll. Faced with the choice between protecting the financial grift of his wife's non-royal family and maintaining the stability of his reign, Charles chose the crown. He chose survival. For Camilla, that silence was a death blow. It was the moment the velvet drape was pulled back, exposing the staggering vulnerability of her position. You have to understand the depth of this commercial desperation. Camilla is queen consort, but she is essentially a glittering tenant of the state. She does not own Buckingham Palace. She does not own Windsor Castle. She does not control the sovereign grant. And now she has been entirely locked out of the Duchy of Cornwall, the only private funding mechanism that could have quietly subsidized her family's aristocratic lifestyle. If she outlives Charles, her reality becomes incredibly precarious. She will be a queen dowager reliant entirely on the goodwill of a new king, King William. a man who has just proven he possesses the tactical ruthlessness to dismantle her networks with a single signature. She has no ancestral estates to retreat to that rival the royal properties. She possesses no independent billionaire fortune. The illusion of her absolute power evaporated the moment she realized she was wearing borrowed jewels in a borrowed house, surrounded by staff paid by a stepson who silently despises what she represents. This financial exile was only the first phase of the institutional reckoning. With the shadow payroll severed, William and Catherine began to silently, methodically assert control over the deeper symbolic power of the monarchy. If the Duchy audit was the financial blow, what happened next was the visual humiliation. It began with the royal collection, the vast, priceless vault of art, furniture and jewellery owned by the sovereign in trust for the nation. During the late Queen's declining years and in the chaotic early days of Charles's reign, Camilla had enjoyed relatively unchecked access to the vaults. She had systematically begun wearing pieces deeply associated with the late Queen Mother, and deliberately avoiding anything tied to Diana, attempting to establish herself as the sole matriarchal figure of the modern era. But suddenly the protocol shifted. What looked like a routine administrative update regarding the preservation of historical artifacts was actually a quiet locking of the vault doors. When Camilla's office requested a specific, highly prominent sapphire parure for an upcoming state banquet, a piece heavily associated with the pinnacle of royal majesty, the request was politely routed through a new approval process. The answer returned from the administrative officers was devastatingly courteous. The piece was currently undergoing long-term conservation and was unavailable for wear. That detail matters. Because in the language of the palace, a piece going into conservation immediately after a request is made is not a logistical issue. It is a locked door. It was a clear, unarguable signal that access to the ultimate symbols of royal power was no longer guaranteed. And while Camilla was being quietly denied access to the most potent symbols of the crown, Catherine was stepping directly into the light. Viewers noticed a subtle but undeniable shift in the visual hierarchy. Catherine began appearing at diplomatic receptions and state functions wearing pieces of breathtaking historical weight, including the lover's knot tiara and the emerald choker famously favoured by Diana. This was not a coincidence. It was a restoration. William and Catherine were silently restoring the legacy Camilla had spent 3 decades trying to erase. By controlling the finances and gently restricting the symbolic artifacts, they were boxing her into a very narrow, purely ceremonial corner. They allowed her to keep the title, the balcony appearances, and the carriage rides, because stripping her of those would damage the king. But beneath the surface, they had hollowed out her entire operational base. This is the ultimate contrast of Schadenfreude. To the casual observer watching a royal procession, Camilla appears to have reached the absolute zenith of human ambition. She is the queen. But behind the heavy wooden doors of the palaces, she is a woman acutely aware that she is utterly powerless. She is flanked by courtiers who answer to William. She is living on estates managed by William. She is staring at a future dictated by William. The story of Camilla's financial and symbolic dismantling is not just a tale of royal family drama, it is a masterclass in institutional warfare. It shows how the truly powerful do not need to scream leak to the tabloids or throw public tantrums to destroy an adversary. They simply use the bureaucratic machinery already in place. They weaponize the rules. They enforce the law, and they wait. Prince William did not just protect the Duchy of Cornwall, he protected the integrity of the crown itself from being quietly siphoned off by a family that had no right to its resources. He delivered a silent, perfectly executed checkmate. Camilla finally achieved the title she spent her whole life chasing, only to realize that the throne she sits on is entirely hollow. If you found this forensic breakdown of royal power dynamics compelling, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an analysis of the hidden machinery driving the world's most secretive institutions.